Great. Well, welcome to the fourth Rulemaking Advisory Committee for Middle Housing Oregon Homes. As always, Ben Duncan, your facilitator. We're going to dive right in to an exciting conversation reflecting the draft rules. So why don't I do some of our opening logistics and we'll jump into the conversation. If we go to the next slide. As a reminder, this is a Zoom live stream webinar. I guess it's just a live stream Zoom meeting. It is recorded. For members of the public, you are not able to access the conversation, but you will be able to hear and listen to the discussion that happens at the RAC. We do have closed captions available if it's helpful for your participation. Depending on your view, you can click the More button on the bottom of your screen or CC for closed captioning and click Show Captions. If that's helpful for your participation. We're going to ask, for our RAC members as much as possible to leave your cameras on. Again, this is a public meeting and also just to create the spirit of being in the room together and building community. As I think most have already, if you haven't, we'll ask folks to rename with your name and affiliation. If you don't remember how to do that, you can hover over your own box or your own image, click on the three dots or ellipses, click rename, and then put your name yourself, either as an individual or organizational affiliation. And then finally, we don't use the chat function. It's not visible to the public. Unless you have technical issues, or if you send something to me in the chat, I will bring it into the room on your behalf. But we ask that you don't use chat for any substantive contribution. If you go to the next slide. As a reminder for our meeting guidelines, particularly as we're getting into this space of conversation, reviewing draft rules, a lot of interest-based perspectives in the room. We've been really intentional with the agenda, with the focused conversations that we're hoping to have today. So we'll ask as much as possible, stay on topic. Hopefully you all had a chance to look at the draft rules and the pre-meeting materials that give you some discussion prompts of where we want to focus today. We'll balance speaking time. So this will be a time where, as we're getting into the rules to really understand implications. So there will be times where we're specifically inviting, for example, local governments to really offer their perspectives to make sure that these rules are implementable in real time. Listen to learn and to understand, to be curious with each other, as I've said throughout this entire process, to the extent that you all are able to give, consistent and consensus-based feedback to DLCD, that's really, really powerful. So listening to each other, trying to understand where there's avenues for agreement is incredibly helpful. Be constructive, right? So we'll just ask, particularly in this space when we're getting into draft rules, not I don't like how that's written, but I don't like how that's written. Here's what would make it work better for me, right? So really going to push you all to take critique and concern and offer solutions in a constructive way. As always, we want you to address the issues and to raise questions, but to refrain from talking about people or organizations. Again, finding common ground is a gift. And then, we will have a couple meetings to talk about rules. Today is a really important day to kind of put things on the table, to name things that are of concern. So we'll ask you to really bring it to this meeting, and hopefully we'll be able to find reconciliation for concerns, barriers, or things that we can find improvement for. If we go to the next slide. So, as I've alluded to, you all have received the draft rules, and I will emphasize and put in capital letters, draft rules, right, that are really meant for discussion. And this is really reflective early of our process to get these rules out to you early where we have time to discuss, and we'll have another opportunity to discuss further later in May. We are going to really try to focus this conversation on design standards, on siting standards, and an emphasis on local review processes. I know there may be other things that come up in this conversation. We are going to try to center this discussion today on those topics, but not at the expense of things that may be of interest to you that are outside of those kind of 3 bullet points that you see here. And to support that, if we go to the next slide, we built an agenda that probably looks relatively familiar in terms of our process. We will do introductions here in a second. We'll move into just a brief reminder, grounding ourselves in the racial equity framework and some of the key concepts that you all named early in our process. We'll create a bit of space if there's anything that came up from our last meeting that folks would like to bring in the room from from RAC 3. And then Becky will provide some overarching comments and some kind of lead in to the discussions that we're hoping to have as she reflects on the draft rules overview. We'll move into 2 chunks of discussion. The first on siting standards and design standards. We'll take a break and then move into a discussion on local review processes. And we'll get you out of here by noon. So again, hopefully this is a really robust conversation. DLCD's done a really good job of trying to put out some discussion prompts. And I'll, again, be bringing folks in, from interest-based perspectives at critical times to really center in on making sure that these rules are implementable. Let's keep going. Next slide. So let's do some introductions. I'll just go in the order that you see on the screen, starting with Alexandra.
Actually, no. Alexandra Rang, League of Oregon Cities. I work on issues of housing, land use, and homelessness.
Thank you. Welcome. Andy?
I am Andy Bolton, Acting Manager of Policy and Technical Services with the Building Codes Division.
Thanks, Andy. Annika? See Annika? Brandon? I'll pay attention as folks are coming in. I see people keep joining, so we'll keep an eye on it. Brock, I saw Brock somewhere. Yep.
Park Nation, Oregon Realtors.
Thank you, Brock. Catherine? Kathy?
Hi, Catherine Rigby, interested individual living in Newport.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Cheryl Bell. I'm one of the Assistant Directors, Department of Transportation and Development for Clackamas County.
Thank you. Destin?
Destin Verdun from Polish Commercial Director of Affordable Housing Development.
Thank you. Diego?
Hello, Diego Diaz with Housing Oregon.
Thank you. Eric?
Good morning, Eric Rutledge, City of Sherwood.
Thank you. Elsa? Fred?
Hi there, everybody. Fred Evander, City of Independence.
Thank you. Jerica? Jerry? See you there somewhere, Jerry. Okay, I see you there, Jerry. So we'll count you as here. Jill?
Hi, Jill Kropp from Studio Kropp Architecture. I'm an architect working with developers on middle housing in the Portland metro area.
Thank you. Jim? Is it Jim? Jonathan? Nora? Lee?
Lee Armstrong, Lee Armstrong from Habitat for Humanity in Portland.
Thank you. Mary Kyle?
Mary Kyle McCurdy with 1000 Friends of Oregon.
Thank you. Mark? Morgan? Saw Morgan somewhere.
I am here. My computer has been struggling with me a little bit, but I finally got my camera working. Morgan Tracy, City of Portland. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Shane will be a little bit late. We'll circle back. Sarah? Sarah? And Samantha. Okay, did I miss anybody that came in after the alphabetical order? Brandon, there you are.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Brandon Persinger, Association of Oregon Counties. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
And Jerry Lids, my sound and video should be on now.
Both are on. We could see you, we could hear you. Thank you. Let's see, I didn't see Chair Lazo. Okay. We'll welcome Chair Lazo if he joins later. And then as we typically do, I'll just ask DLCD staff as you jump into the conversation to introduce yourself at that time. Okay, let's keep moving. So I'll just be really brief on the racial equity framework. As a reminder, right, it incorporates a set of considerations around historical inequities, benefits and burdens, data equity, data justice, thinking about that type of analysis, how community voice and meaningful involvement is shaped and can shape decisions, and then thinking about the outcomes that come related to restorative justice, creating deeper accountability, and then ensuring that you have measurable outcomes and ongoing improvement. As a reminder, if you go to the next slide, you name some of the things that this group can consider as we continue to move through this rulemaking process. Reminding yourselves and each other around some of the history of exclusion, of barriers, delays, of costs, of not in my backyard NIMBYism, reminding yourselves of some of the ways that benefits and burdens are distributed around production and how types and costs can expanding the type and reducing costs can improve access, and thinking about safety, well-being as we have this conversation, that we recognize the populations that have been disproportionately housing insecure and excluding from housing access, and many community identified needs. And this is just a portion of that list that you all named. So with that, just as a regrounding, this is again a reflection back to what you all brought. Just asked to continue to hold that frame as we go through today's conversation. You go next slide. So as we do, we'll create a little bit of space if there's things that came out of meeting 3 that you'd like to bring back into the room. We did have some high-level key themes around the tree replacement and removal requirements. A pretty consistent theme from this group that they should be simple, objective, when required, and certainly thinking about viability. That the local ministerial review process was a theme that emerged, just recognizing the role that local jurisdictions play as part of the building permit process, and this concept that around what is precluded or that locals should not be required, but should allow for notification. And we had a conversation that was very locally contextualized, and then focus on cottage cluster definition is an average per unit size, and we'll be coming back to that in the next meeting. So any other reflections or anything that's come up for folks between our last meeting and today's conversation? Fred, were you drawing in the air or was that a hand raised?
I was talking to somebody in my office. I
Okay.
apologize.
No, I didn't know if you were signaling me or not. All right. Okay. Not seeing any hands. Let's move into. Oh, Ethan, you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to do a little bit of reflection too, if I could. I think folks who have been part of a rulemaking process with DLCD will be able to pick up on the kind of like corner that we've turned here in this rulemaking process, right? The first 3 meetings of this group, we were talking about the policy, things that are important to folks, like describing how this program can and should work. And now we've turned the corner to this conversation today, where we'll be talking not in those more, theoretical policy kind of conversations, but really with the lens towards actual draft rules. And so, the folks who this is the first time on the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, I just wanted to kind of highlight that this conversation is going to likely feel different than the conversations that we've had for the first 3, and that's intentional. Right now we have something for you all to chew on, to say like, okay, we've had all this first 3 conversations and I see none of that here, or I see that piece reflected here and maybe you missed the mark, or maybe it's right on. And so Yeah, I just want to kind of call out the kind of change in conversation that we'll be having today and really the rest of this process, which is going to be like really grounded in the actual text of the rules. So thanks in advance for following along with us and having that conversation with us.
Okay, well, that's a wonderful segue to pass the mic to Becky. So Becky, if you can introduce yourself and then floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Ben and Ethan, for that great tee up like you mentioned. I am Becky Catino. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a housing planner at DLCD. And I'm going to be giving a very high level overview of the draft rules and just to kind of go over a couple of things before diving in. Just again, to reiterate, these are very much draft rules and that we are really seeking all of your input today. And the discussion's really going to inform edits that we make and really are key to creating rules that, you know, can be as usable as possible. And I wanted to thank those folks that have already sent us their input, and that's already been really helpful as we start to draft that second version. And I would just encourage folks that are in the room that maybe don't speak up as often, if you want to send us that written feedback, or if anyone has very particular, you know, grammar or typos and of that nature, just sending us something in email, that's going to be really helpful again as we create that second draft. And lastly, again, you know, there's a lot here. There's the whole draft rules, but today's conversation, we're really hoping to focus in on those 3 specific areas. And I would just say that we also have our 5th RAC meeting in May to finish up the conversation. We'll also be talking about the cottage cluster definition. That's part of the kind of Part 2 middle housing HB 2138. So again, some of that energy, if we could shift to RAC 5, but also we don't want to discourage conversation. We don't want to discourage thought. So we do have time allotted at the end of the meeting to talk about just overall how did these rules land for folks. So again, really appreciate all of your feedback. And so with all of that preamble, I'm going to jump in. So we again have rules that are derived from 2258 that was passed in 25 last year. And these rules create the Oregon Homes program, specifically the rules around the land use portion of Oregon Homes. So what is an Oregon home has been defined by that bill. So that language we did not add to, along with what is an Oregon Homes lot. We did not add anything to those definitions. And you'll see in the definition section, that's where we're putting the requirements for Oregon Homes development. That's the term we've coined, again, taking input on that. And then Oregon's Homes lot. So that's really where folks are going to need to look to just, you know, is this development going to fall into this program? That's a section that you're going to want to go to. Also in definitions, just to be really clear, we've added design standards, siding standards, because there's some kind of confusion, or there can be, around, you know, what falls into each category, as well as site plan, to just create clarity as folks are reviewing the rules. We have created rules under these 5 areas because that's what the bill allows us to. So we didn't add anything there. So getting into the local government review process, we've called out that to review Oregon home development, that it should be a ministerial review, a type 1 review. This is really a completeness check that if the development meets all the criteria as outlined in these rules, then the application should be approved. So again, the intent there is to have the process as quick as possible for a local jurisdiction, you know, not taking up staff time, and to have that clear and objective. There's no kind of confusion about should this be approved or not. It should be as clear as possible as the rules are written. For design standards, there's, you know, a lot that we could have included, but we've limited it down to just a few in terms of the entryway orientation, the sorry, just finding my place. Street facing facade details and garage and driveways and waste storage facilities. So again, we could have added a lot more, but with the intent of keeping rules as, you know, concise as possible, those are the four we've included. Again, taking feedback. A lot of the standards, we use the model code as a inspiration because, you know, that has been vetted by consultants, by developers, by local governments to be deemed feasible. So that's another question. Does that work for folks? Does that make sense? There's also, you know, the consideration, there are a lot of different laws and rules coming out from the state, and having that kind of repetition so folks aren't going to be having, you know, too much to kind of have discrepancies with. So that was kind of the thinking there. For siting standards, we are looking at the lot detail. So again, putting forward ideas included in the model code. Those siting standards we're looking at are the setback, the density standards, which that is something from the bill language itself. So that's not something that we added because, you know, we felt like that's what it had to be. And then we also include outdoor space standards being a consideration for the development to have that overall quality of life feeling. And then going into variances and adjustments, while this is a program intended to be creating no discrepancy that this is an Oregon Homes lot, Oregon Homes development, it can be approved. We acknowledge that there's a lot of variety with lots. There's a lot of possibility if there's just one tweak that a development could be feasible. So what we've put forward is a flat 10% variance for these different criteria. Not every criteria can be allowed a variance. Like I mentioned, the density requirement was outlined in the bill. We can't allow for that, as along with the tree standards. So that is where, you know, there can't be a variance, but in the other criteria, other provisions of the bill, we have allowed. And then lastly, for the tree standards, we have not added anything that is not already in the bill besides a fee in lieu option, which again, to give local governments a little bit more flexibility of how to address that. So with that very high level overview, I will pause, and I see Kathy's hand is up.
Yeah, jump in, Kathy.
I just had a question, and maybe it was just my packet, but on the going back to the design standards, I have 1, 2, 3. I'm missing 4, and then it jumps to 5 storage facilities for trash on between pages 5 and 6. Is there a 4? Was it left off, or it's just misnumbered?
Misnumbered.
Okay.
Good catch. Thanks, Kathy. Any other questions? Thanks for opening the door. Thanks, Becky. Okay. Not seeing any hands. Let's move into the conversation. So if we can go to the next slide. And again, as I said earlier, really want to start with some prompt questions. And I know these were in your meeting packet. And we want to start with implications, right? So I'm really going to invite particularly our local government representatives in the room to offer some insights reflective of the questions. And we're going to try to go as best as we can in the order of discussion, at least starting with design and then moving into siting. So for the design standard questions, One, could these standards get in the way of approving the development? So we're, again, really trying to hold the spirit of what these rules are trying to accomplish. What could get in the way? Are the standards as proposed sufficient to ensure predictability for development across multiple jurisdictions and or sites for the same structures? That might be a local government, it might be developer type question to really invite folks in. Again, what's the real world effects and implications of this? And to what extent can these standards be applied to multiple pre-approved building types? So starting with design, and then we'll give some space for that, but I'll preview the conversation we want to have around siting standards as well. If the floor area ratio were to be included as a standard in this section, what elements would be important to incorporate into the rules? So again, if you're going to do this, what else would need to accompany rule language? Do the proposed standards work with all types of residential developments? And then finally, are there other standards that should be considered? So you'll see a good mix of questions around kind of the existing rules, excuse me, and then some potential additional language. So starting with design, and again, I'll invite our local government folks to begin this conversation. Let's jump into around the standards get in the way of approving development or ensuring predictability, et cetera. Yeah, Morgan.
What standards? I'm going to start there. You've got 4, and one of those is parking and trash. So in terms of the definition of design standards, it means a standard related to the arrangement, orientation, materials, appearance, articulation, or aesthetic or features of dwelling unit or accessory elements on a site. I don't see virtually any of that here. So to the answer to the question, will it stand in the way of development? No, there's nothing really there. I mean, I'm apologize for the ingratitude of the comments. That we were only given 4 days to review these rules, and there's pretty far-reaching consequences since these apply to virtually every lot in our city. And on top of the lack of standards, the lack of clarity in the standards, I'm concerned even well-behaved, well-meaning jurisdictions trying to apply or try to review these applications are going to review them differently just based on the wording in the standards themselves. So as an example, how much window is facing the street? Is that measured the roof opening? Are we measuring the glass itself? Are we subtracting the mullions that are inside the glass? All that stuff. I mean, we don't want the rules to get down to that detail, but I just want to highlight even something as simple as a percentage standard. You're going to have 2 jurisdictions applying it differently. And so the same plan that comes through one city will get approved and another city may get kicked out. And that forces or puts cities in the jeopardy of running potential violation of the housing law without even knowing it. I mean, we're trying our best here and we're trying to follow the rules. So I think we need more standards that address the various types of housing development that are being authorized in this statute. Not just a one size for a house in an 11-unit apartment building. And the standards need to be more clear and more objective. I'll leave it at that.
Back here, Ethan, I need just reflection back based on what you heard or any additional kind of questions or Morgan, based on what you heard.
I would just address the comment about only 4 days to review and just apologize for that. That is not best practice standards, but we had some rounds of revision internally that just kind of is with the timeline, but just wanted to say a big herd to that.
All right, thanks.
And also, just kind of continuing on that, please continue to review these rules, provide comments. Today would be amazing, but is not the only opportunity. We've got some, I think we've got May 20th as our next meeting of the RAC, and that packet will go out May 13th. So we've got, really a good week and a half really to hear any either written comments or pick up the phone, give us a call on these particular set of rules. So yeah, definitely hear you and agree, Morgan. Appreciate your ability to contribute whatever you can.
Well, yeah, Cheryl, jump in, and then I guess, for other folks that, there's likely some things to respond to and reflect on or build upon, in terms of what Morgan introduced, but, and popping around.
Yeah, I'll go
Cheryl,
real
you were
quick.
first. Yep, jump in.
Perfect. Yeah, and I apologize, I had to step away for work, but I'm back. I missed a little bit of Morgan's thing, but I did come in at the tail end, and I just want to I think Ethan, I heard this, that we could go ahead and submit some written comment. My team did a pretty deep dive with the time that we had, but it was limited, and I think that so that I'm efficient in this meeting and allow others to speak and have their voice too. I think we'll probably provide you some written comment as follow-up. It won't be too early next week though, just with timing on my side, but okay, perfect, thank you.
Is there any high-level comments that you just want to reflect for today, Cheryl, just to give a little flavor?
Yeah, I think, we really appreciate what we're trying to do here and getting simplified ways to do home development in Oregon. With the rules as they are proposed, it's actually more complicated for most housing than just a middle housing development currently in the county that's already ministerial, that already has a lot of limitations on it. And we don't have to put all the banners of Oregon Home on the lot. And I think with adding any housing type, not just those preset plans on there, it kind of has gotten complicated. So I just want to make sure we get something that feels like it's workable for the jurisdictions, where we're not trying to carve off these one-off lots that we have to track in perpetuity when we think we have a better tool for our customers already.
That's awesome. Thank you, Cheryl. So let's go Fred, then Brock, then Jerry. You're on mute, Fred.
I lowered my hand and I didn't turn on the microphone.
A lot of steps to get to.
Yeah, that's right. So one thing that I would say is the no parking required is one thing that jumps out at me from this section. Basically, I mean, we can still require parking as a small jurisdiction, and so just saying that no parking is necessary, I think really would potentially be controversial in some of the smaller communities throughout the state. One thing I will say is and I've mentioned this before, we have a requirement that our garages are set back 4 feet from our front facade. We did that in 2010 because we were tired of snout houses in our community, and we did it for the betterment of our community, like taking away our ability to do something that's been successful and actually gotten better development for us over the last 15 years, I think would be something that we would not appreciate here. So that's just a couple of things.
Thanks, Fred. Brock?
Yeah, I want to kind of build off what Morgan said, because I think he's raising a concern here that I think is valid around like the calculation of the percentage area. I guess this is a question for Andy at BCD. Do you guys have anything that discusses like the specifications for how that would be measured? Is that something that could be like cross-referenced here? Just in the interest of keeping the rules simple, but trying to address that concern.
Excuse me. When we get into what's in specifics in code, I kind of want to refer us over to like a technical code expert, which normally would be Jonathan Balkema, who would be here, but I don't think he's here today. So I don't want to get into that because I start stepping on my own toes pretty quickly. I know that windows and doors are very much covered in the code, and our general attitude is that if we're concerned about fire life safety, the code covers us for fire life safety. So if we're doing requirements elsewise, we are already covered in all the building safety requirements under the code.
Okay, thank
you. Thanks, Brock. Jerry?
My concern is that the list of factors we want to keep in mind for today includes nothing about compatibility with the neighborhood. And much as I know we want to maximize housing, I think it would be helpful to take steps, particularly on setbacks, and especially from setbacks from the street, to make sure that we make at least some effort to make the new developments compatible with the neighborhood. We do not want to provoke a hostile response to increasing the density of housing. Let's make it function in that community.
Jerry, maybe this is naive questions, but so you use setbacks as an example. Is that one of a variety of examples, right? Like when you talk about compatibility, are there other kind of illustrative things that feel important to name?
Setbacks were the top of my list, let's put it that way.
Okay, fair. Jill?
I have a list that might be, it's very dense, but I just thought it would make the most sense to do it all at once. So I guess the main thing is Morgan talked about same setbacks for a 1-story or an 11-story apartment building. I guess my understanding is that this is just for middle housing and that would be a residential scale, a residential building code. And so I don't imagine it would be higher than 3 stories. I mean, I guess maybe, is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, Ben, I'll jump in. So the applicability is those housing types that are articulated in the bill. It does include middle housing, but it does include, I'm going to not get the language quite right, but multi-unit developments from 7 to 11 units. So more than 6, but less than 12.
Okay, so there isn't really, okay. Okay, well, so I guess in terms of, is this barriers to approval, I agree to a degree with what Morgan was saying about how do different jurisdictions interpret or decide to review a code. Because this came up in a meeting I was in last week, that sometimes you could have the exact same plan, but one jurisdiction has a way they want you to put the information on the page. And then you get a check sheet for that when it was approved at another jurisdiction with the exact same information in the exact same way. So I'm not sure how you deal with that because people, we're all like reviewers are human. So I don't know. I guess that's something that I'm concerned about. Is just how do jurisdictions interpret the information or the requirements. And then some specifics about, oh, and then also commenting on the compatibility. That is one that that one is hard. You got to make sure that's clear and measurable, whatever the term is. You can't just say must look like the neighborhood, because how do you define that? So it would need to be something specific about like window trims or overhangs. But I don't think that's a good idea because you can build a house in a neighborhood in a lot of jurisdictions that they don't have to have a certain overhang or certain trim. And I don't think that we should be stifling creativity to that degree. So a couple specific things. There was a talk about common space, that units need to be on 2 sides of the common space or have an entry that faces the street. And that is something, if you're talking specifically about cottage clusters, that's interpreted differently in different jurisdictions. City of Portland doesn't require that you have cottages on each side of the common space. I know some of the neighboring suburbs to Portland do require that. I've always had a problem with it because for a lot of small lots, maybe you could do 3 cottages, but it only works if it's maybe only a 50-foot wide lot. So you're not going to be able to get a cottage cluster on there. And then, the standard about that standards are waived for accessible or adaptable. And I really think you need to define what that is and have a very clear, like to what standard, and make it very specific. Setbacks, I thought that the 5 feet for under 35 feet and then 10 feet for more felt reasonable if you were talking about sides and rears. However, I have a lot of concern about a 5-foot setback in the front, and I don't know a lot about the model code, but it's my understanding that that is allowed in the modern code. In the model code, I just have problems with that. I just think for living space on the ground floor, that's too close to the sidewalk. They're not going to be very desirable units. I wonder if there's maybe there's a standard. I don't know if you're allowed maybe to sort of make a distinction between an urban setting and a rural setting in terms of those front setbacks. For FAR, about how you would include FAR. I know in the city of Portland, garages are included in the FAR. And then in some of the suburban jurisdictions, it's not really included or you're allowed. The garage has sort of an in-between way of being included. And I think that that's appropriate. And so that's another thing I wonder if you could, like the size of the jurisdiction maybe, or the location of it could determine whether garages are included or not. And I know I'm talking a long time, but I think I'm going to be quiet for most of the rest of the meeting. Find where. Oh, the last thing is I've never been really clear about, are Oregon homes only allowed to be built on Oregon home lots? Or like I think Cheryl pointed out, or Morgan pointed out, could this be any single family lot in a jurisdiction? That part is unclear to me. And if jurisdictions have control over, I don't think jurisdictions, I guess, should have control over where an Oregon home lot is. But I also don't know if I'm understanding it. So hopefully that was a lot. So
Well,
thank you.
maybe I'll start, Ethan, with you. It was a lot, Jill. So maybe, Ethan, if you want to work through any reflection back and some clarity, and then we can keep the conversation going.
Yeah, I took some notes. So helpful comments on the FAR. And I think that's a question that I want to like throw out to the group. I know that's part of the citing stuff, but question in particular about, you'll notice that an FAR standard is not included in the draft rules, but that was one of the ones where we were, I was like, it's in the model code. Does it make sense in the Oregon home context? And so thoughts on that would be great. Jill, you provided things that are included and not included in that calculation for some jurisdictions. Helpful. On common courtyard, the approach in the model code is to basically articulate something along the lines of, like, we're not talking about units just facing the backyard, for example, and that courtyard is intended to be like the common space, and so that's just the source of that standard from the model code. And not to say that that's necessarily the right approach here in Oregon homes. It's just what the standard's like, a copy and paste from the model code. So, but that's really the reason, is that it is like an orientation to the courtyard, not just an orientation to like the back of the lot, for example. And then on your final comment on Oregon lot, Oregon home. So I don't think it's an entirely accurate statement to say that Oregon homes can only be built on Oregon home lots. Oregon homes is like the pre-approval of the building itself through the state. And in theory, you could take that pre-approval and propose that development on any lot that's zoned residential and meets those criteria. But in the context of the Oregon Homes program and the regulatory streamline that this program creates for the approval of those developments, you have to have both of those things come together, the Oregon home development and the Oregon home lot. And those are the two keys that unlock the door towards these standards that we're talking about today. So I guess in theory, you could, a person could take their pre-approved Oregon home and build it through the quote unquote typical development process, not using the Oregon homes lot. If it doesn't meet the criteria, it's too large, or it has slopes of a certain greater than the 15%, like you can still propose that development and go through the typical process, but you don't have the access to the Oregon Homes program, if that makes sense. Does that clarify? Jill?
Jill?
Well, I'm sorry, what was that?
It was
Did
just
that
clarifying
clarify?
that
Yeah.
last piece that like.
Oh, yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, let's go Fred, Eric, Alexandra.
Perfect. So yeah, this is sort of getting back to the Oregon homes may apply to any sort of residential lot sort of concept, and Jerry's comment that he brought up earlier about setbacks and ways to ensure that it fits with the community character. I think a basic local government review process, and it sort of applies to the siting standards, is I think basically our local government setbacks, density, allowed uses, height, lot coverage should continue to apply to the lot. Because I mean, without those things, I mean, potentially we're going to get a building that has more units than would be allowed under our zoning, with setbacks that are closer than would be allowed under our zoning, with potentially no parking required, which wouldn't be allowed under our zoning, and covering a greater portion of the lot. And I think all of those things together would, cause the backlash that Jerry's talking about in local communities.
Fred, Ethan, jump in.
Can I just confirm height, setbacks, parking, and lot coverage are the ones that you were referring to?
I think density, I think allowed uses probably too. Because I mean, our single family residential zones do not allow 6 to 12 units in a structure. So that would be significantly more than our current residential zone allows.
Okay, thanks. I just want to get that for that.
Okay, I want to come back to that. Eric?
Thanks. Just want to say first, thanks to DLCD. Not a easy thing to do to stand up a program. So I know you guys are working hard. Wanted to echo Jill's comments, setbacks, you have 5 feet to the front. Really, that would be a huge change for Sherwood. Our front setback right now is 20 feet. So having a 5-foot setback in any neighborhood in any non-multifamily neighborhood is gonna be a big change. So I'd recommend, 10 at a minimum. If I'm trying to compromise, I'd prefer to stay with the base zone of 20, but I think 10 would be much more reasonable than 5, and I would add that to the front and to the rear. I didn't see any height limits in the development standards, and just picking up on Fred's comment as well, like maybe the compromise there would be like a percentage maximum over the base zone. So, you don't have to stick hard and fast to the jurisdiction's local code, but maybe it's a maximum of, 20% over, something like that, just to make sure it's somewhat to scale if a home is actually built, over the height limit. And then is more of a question, wasn't quite sure when and if there would be a chance for fire in terms of the site plan, and not the design standards, but the site planning in terms of fire access. So like, a turnaround, for example. So the fire code's going to have a turnaround requirement at certain times on the site itself. So at what point would that review happen? Is that going to be through the BCD? Because they don't know the lot yet. So I didn't see that in the local review process. And like you know, if we have to approve if it meets the standards, well, what if those standards don't allow a fire turnaround because all the setbacks are 5 feet? So there has to be a process to work in the fire code through the type one. And I would add to that trash as well. I mean, fire is safety related, so I think it's most important. But I mentioned this in the last meeting, trash as well. Frankly, I've been surprised at how strict, with all due respect to our trash pickup, crews around town. They have very specific standards, and it's mainly around operations. And so they have equipment, and if their equipment can't access that, then they're either having to buy new equipment or they have to, stop in the street, have their staff, pull something out. It's really time consuming. So I would just add those two. Like, at what point does both fire and trash review? And what if their standards are in conflict with the site plan allowances? I think that's a big question that needs to be addressed through process or through the code.
Yeah, it is a particularly that last one on fire turnarounds, and it's something that I've been thinking about in that review process of, what are there instances when or how and what instances would Oregon Homes development process be, I don't know what the word is, altered or be approved with consideration of fire access, for example, a fire turnaround? Does that come through in those kind of the processes that local governments are still allowed to apply to Oregon Home Review, which is public facilities and traffic impact analyses? And what happens in an instance where those reviews result in some sort of change to the development proposal, for example? And how does that bear out? So that's something that we're still thinking about. I don't think we have a necessarily good answer for you, but I'm glad that you've also been thinking about that, Eric, and others, I'm sure. So
Good. Thanks. Let's go Morgan, then Alexandra.
Alexandra, go first. I want to not hog the time.
Okay, I think, in going through this increasingly, what I'm struck by is we're trying to create, and something that came up when the initial legislation was being passed, we're trying to create a statewide standard in a state that is not very uniform at all in terms of our communities. So I think what I'll highlight is we do have the leeway to say that these are the standards for cities of this size, these are the standards for cities of this size. And that may be a better way to address some of the challenges that we're seeing. Like, not all of our cities are currently held to no parking, like, as a requirement. And so it's not realistic to say that Independence should be held to the same standards as City of Portland. Even now, under our existing statutes, that's not the case. So why make that the case for this program? I know it makes the rules more complicated, and I know, Ethan, you have heard me say that I don't want these rules to be 400 pages long, and here I am saying that maybe they should be 400 pages long. Maybe 40 is a more reasonable thing, but
there you go. You're already compromising. There you go.
I know. But that may be a better way to address this, because I really cannot see a way in which you can create a program that feasibly works in every city in Oregon. And you're gonna have to have some kind of population requirements for some of these things. Also, just double, triple underline on Eric's points about fire code and trash. This is an increasing problem that we're seeing across cities in Oregon, where the standards that we're seeing implemented at the state level are not really something that our local governments can deal with. Our fire trucks are all different sizes, and fire trucks are millions of dollars, and our jurisdictions don't necessarily have the ability to just buy new fire trucks because the state has imposed a new requirement on how wide XYZ is. We want to make sure our residents are safe. That is first and foremost. And we love housing. We want more housing, but if we can't get our fire trucks, our garbage trucks, etc., that's a huge problem.
Thanks, Alexandra. We'll come back to one of these. Seems like a theme that's maybe emerging. We can talk about Morgan and then Dustin.
I'm going to throw out, not necessarily propose, because I want to just float this idea, a sort of radical idea that I think when it comes to the structure itself, there are standards that can be crafted that can be relatively universally applied. And I think to take some of the potential disagreement out of the idea, like for the structure, the building component, that's going through BCD, right? BCD, and then they're going to farm it out to local jurisdictions to check their math kind of. I'm thinking maybe DLCD does that version for the structure itself, the components that are attached to the structure, the size of it, the porch of it, the facades on it, and then it gets passed to the local jurisdictions for siting. And the siting, all those issues that are being brought up can be handled within the local siting requirements. And if there's concern about overzealous requirements, then DLCD can put in their rules, floors and ceilings for how much we can control within that siting standard, which you've done in the original model ordinance. I don't think that's the way they were done in the subsequent model ordinance. But just an idea, like the structure, like make that a complete package that happens at the state level. Once the builder has their prize, this unit thing, the product, they go find a lot that in the jurisdiction is going to fit on based on the setbacks and the building coverage. I think that's kind of it. And the pedestrian access, the driveway access, all the access issues that come up, the fire access issues that come up, all that can be handled at the local level. That's just throwing that idea out there.
Thanks, Morgan. Let's go Dustin, then Fred, then Brock.
Yeah, so I think I said this in an email a little while ago. I apologize for missing the last one, but from a development point of view, layering rules upon rules is always a little bit problematic, right? We're trying to make this simpler. I think that's one of the intentions of the effort. Again, from a development point of view, the problem that appears to be trying to be solved is to provide a ministerial review, I think, because some jurisdictions use NIMBY, efforts such as type 3 reviews or design reviews or other accesses to limit middle housing and limit housing development. And I know there's a parallel effort associated with housing production going on at the state level, which is a really important component of this as well. But I would encourage, kind of in Morgan's line, to keep it as simple as possible to provide a ministerial, or to require the jurisdictions to provide a ministerial effort without trying to lay across a bunch of new standards, because that makes it harder for development. You're reviewing from more ways. I would generally go and get an Oregon Homes product and just go through the jurisdiction's regular process, so I didn't have to raise or layer things in a more complicated manner than is already available. And also not to draw community backlash associated with it.
Thanks, Dustin. Fred, Brock, Cheryl.
Yeah, I really think that Morgan's idea is a good idea, and I was actually like drawing out something that's really kind of similar. If I were to apply what I would consider design standards, I would apply them up front to the houses that are getting designed by BCD. So if there's design standards that apply them at that level, and then have homes that are nice looking that could then be approved on lots subject to local criteria. The analogy that I've sort of thrown out there in the past is like Sears homes. Sears homes were designed a particular way, and then they could get shipped to the site and dealt with at the site. It seems to me like if we wanted to do something similar to that, that makes sense. But again, I would craft design standards here that would then apply to the BCD home, not at the level of city jurisdiction, if that makes sense.
So yeah, Ethan.
Just following that a little further, then the local government would apply in their review, what standards would they
I think
consider?
many of the siting standards that Morgan was talking about, but like if it's actually a well-designed home up front, then we're not going to have some of the backlash that could be associated with something like that. And so, yeah, the siting standards, again, setbacks, density, lot coverage, making sure that fire could be addressed, making sure that the height is okay. And then also looking at things like access spacing requirements for things like collector and arterial streets and whatnot.
Ethan, did you want to add a follow-up?
Well, I think, yeah, interesting thoughts. I think my understanding of 2258's intent is that those standards that are applied to those developments are not a different set of standards in each jurisdiction necessarily, so that the review process is similar or the same across each jurisdiction, and that there's not a 10-foot setback in one jurisdiction and a 20-foot setback in another.
Yeah, I wonder, I mean, Ethan, I think you're responding to what it feels like I'm hearing in Brock and Cheryl. I'll come to you in a second. You know, it feels like there's this desire to have a bit more kind of deference to kind of the local context, and folks trying to find kind of what's the approach that could kind of find this balance between kind of where, you know, Jerry used the word compatibility, but if you take height as an example, like, I guess, do folks have feelings around, you know, Eric, you had said, like, when you look at height, maybe it's a maximum over, right? So there's some deference to kind of compatibility at the local level, but there's an approach that says it's a percentage max or a percentage minimum or whatever that is. So the rules have some level of local relationship while also not just kind of opening it up more broadly. I think the other piece, Alexandra, and I think Jill, you had brought this up from an approach standpoint, is really the size of the jurisdiction. And I guess, like, maybe I'll look to DLCD, like, is that what you're hearing, right? Is like that maybe an approach that this group is seeking to say, how do you hold some level of local, whether it's compatibility, local deference, but having some parameters around it that still provides clear and objective. Because I do think, you know, Dustin, your comment of, right, if it's different in every single jurisdiction, then it's kind of the antithesis of what the rules we're trying to create from the beginning. So I guess I'm just trying to understand what we're hearing from some folks, and maybe DLCD, I'll ask you, like, are you hearing the same thing? Like, folks are really trying to find this middle space between, you know, some level of compatibility and local, you know, kind of local review kind of authority, while also, you know, trying to still maintain, right, this streamlined process that is more ministerial in its application. So I guess maybe I'll just put that out in the world and ask maybe if people have other thoughts on that. But Brock, let's go to you and then Cheryl, because I feel like that's what I'm hearing, and I'm wondering if folks have other ideas, like Eric brought in, to say, what if we looked at a maximum percentage, or some of the conversations of Alexandra around, does it apply to different sizes of jurisdictions or whatever that is? So Ethan, maybe you respond, and then I'll go to Brock and Cheryl.
Well, yeah, I think this is really where we get down to, like, the legislative, like, what is 2258 direct, and what changes under 2258? Is deference to the local standards even on offer here? And I think the Oregon Homes program, as I understand it and have heard it described, is that there is not, that the standardization is what is sought here, and deference to local standards, even if the amount of deference that is allowed under the Oregon Homes program is standardized. Still, the concept of that variation, I think, is, one of the core elements of what 2258 is trying to overcome or to address head on. So yeah, interesting thoughts. I think we'll have to do lots more thinking on, how that fits or whether that fits.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. I mean, I think you're describing what I was hoping that you could respond to, as I'm feeling what I think this group is trying to weave a pathway towards, or at least some members of the group are trying to weave a pathway towards. So thanks for just kind of saying that bluntly. Brock, and then Cheryl, please.
Yeah, this may come kind of as an unexpected comment from me. One, I think Morgan definitely ate his Wheaties this morning. He came in strong today. But I like it. I like it. I think the reason that what I'm going to say sounds unexpected is because, typically I'm coming out and I'm just saying, hey, let's get it built, right? I think there is definitely a needed nuance, though, that Alexander brought up and that Morgan and Eric and others have alluded to, around, just how different the base standards might be from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. The one reason I say it won't be unexpected, I am always in favor of ground truthing things. And so I think Morgan's suggestion of kind of build out, what you think it should look like within the parameters of the bill, give it to the cities, let them take a look, show where there might be some hiccups, right? Bring it back, and then we can really focus in on those aspects, and trying to figure out a way to make that work in that kind of standardized way, to the extent practical to do so. But I think that's a really good idea. I'm always in favor of ground truthing what we do in rural. And since we're doing it with BCD, I think it's very sensible to do that here too.
Thank you, Brock. Cheryl?
Yeah, really great discussion, really great comments. I agree with Morgan and Fred and Alexandra and Brock and everyone who's talked, obviously, from a jurisdiction as well. I guess two pieces to add, and then clarity on my part. So when we talked a lot about setbacks here in this part of the conversation, which is really important. I think one of the things, since I represent a county, we do have lots that are unincorporated county in the metro area that don't have frontage improvements to date. A 5-foot setback, we have an 8-foot setback for utilities and right of way. We literally have had this happen where if we build to old setbacks from another jurisdiction and then right away comes in, people lose their front yard. And so there's some nuance there in making sure that we can get future infrastructure improvements in areas like surrounding counties where that vision is coming, but it's not built yet. And I think that's something really important. The setbacks also, we do have lots that are on septic, and that's not addressed in here. And we had concerns about setbacks to things like existing septic systems, where you're going to put the septic system, can't build on that area. Or when we get to that multifamily, like, is it allowed? Can we require them be on city water? But it's all kind of tied up in that setback discussion, which leads to that uniqueness that Morgan was speaking of, and what happens in Portland's different than Clackamas County, because we've just got different pressures and constraints. What I am getting a little confused about from my part is my understanding of this bill, as the bill is written, is that an Oregon Homes banner applies to a BCD pre-approved plan and any other type of construction that a developer can bring to light. It's not just those pre-approved plans, which I think then makes it difficult for us to put standards on a pre-approved plan. If it's like, it could be anything. It could be something that I, as a structural engineer, design and build and come in and bring into the county and want to get built in the Oregon Homes program. And I think that's where it starts to, for me, get a little bit harder to get in a lane that we can manage. So just making sure we're all talking about the same thing.
Yeah, so can we get a point of clarity? So Becky, Ethan, like, I think particularly like you could build anything and then find the lot, but it versus both have to be approved. Ethan, I think you talked a little bit about that earlier.
Yeah, I think the the lot itself, whether it meets the class or the qualifications under 2258, is outlined in the bill. So that's the first thing that needs to come together. The other part is the pre-approval nature of those buildings. And both of those elements need to be present to use the Oregon Homes program.
So Cheryl, I think.
I say, I'm going to jump in. Yeah, because that's not the way I'm reading the bill. So I'm curious on Andy's take on
And
that.
I see Andy's hand up, so perfect timing. Yeah.
I know, Ethan, we're going to be talking a little bit more about this. I did want to flag, like, our understanding is different. Our understanding is that once, like, you can, like, if you have your land use approval, you can go any plan review path, whether that is you have your permit ready plan that's been distributed by the division, or you have gone through the master plan review process and you're a builder with your master plan reviewed plan, or you are going through the local building department normal plan review process that the vast majority of plans in the state go through. None of those, like, our understanding of the bill is that the intent is that any one of those three pathways could be cited on the land use approved pathway as well plan.
Ethan, are you looking for your mute button? Because there's this, yeah.
I'm in 2258 right now.
I'll give you a second to look at that. Cheryl, do you want to keep going?
Yeah, no, I appreciate, because that's my understanding as well, that this is essentially then a land use process, not a building process, because any type of structure could go on this lot. Because the county would fully expect, if once the approved plans, the ready-made plans are ready from the state, if somebody wants to bring it in, they'll build it on any lot they have land use, whether it's an Oregon home or not. We're happy to support them in that, through that process. But I think when we start talking about the Oregon home, then if any structure can go on there, then it's really like, this is essentially a new way of approving lots via a land use process. And I think if we understand that, it might help us figure out where we're going with these rules, at least for me, in my mind, because I'm an engineer and I get stuck in a lane.
Yeah, Andy?
The one additional follow-up I put there is I would not go so far as to say any structure can be put on there, just that, like, there's my understanding of section, where are we at? Section 2 sub 4, where we're going into residential development types, is that's an or list, not an and list, that goes through a bunch of different items. And one of those items is pre-approved plans through the division. But another one of those items, for instance, is the 2,200 square foot single unit dwelling. So you probably couldn't build a 2,300 square foot single unit dwelling, but as long as you can find a home in that list somewhere, that our understanding is that you can go through the local plan review process as well.
And I guess, Cheryl, you talked about some of the unique, kind of the future infrastructure and trying to consider kind of setbacks. Can I ask, like, is there a recommendation, right? So if you say 5 feet is too little, like, is there kind of where Eric went, right? What's that compromise, or what works functionally in that example where you're thinking about that future infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm gonna have to ping my planners on that and make sure I speak correctly, but I know, like, I think, our tightest is 15, just with dedications and stuff. We also have a lot of flag lots, and that's a big issue for us, is that then the front of the setback starts to become different looking, and trying to figure out what is the front. We literally are just writing a new section of code to define what means the front of the lot, because we have a lot of flag lots, curved lots on corners, lots with 3 corners, so trying to get that. But I'd be happy to get some more clear language back for a suggestion.
Yeah, and I know you prefaced earlier that you'll send some written comment.
Yeah.
It's hearkening back to one of our earlier conversations around kind of, are there kind of unique lots that should be considered, and in what ways, and how do you name those? Jerry, you're off mute. I don't know if you were jumping in. Oh, now you're on mute. All right, now you're off camera. Okay, I won't worry about it. So before I would pivot, we're kind of right at the time we want to pivot into, I know we've talked a little bit about some of the siting design standards. I guess for Ethan, Becky, if there's anything you want to reflect back or any final comments on kind of design standards before we kind of pivot into siting standards. Okay. There's a lot
Oh,
there.
I'll just jump
Yeah,
in.
Becky.
There's a lot there. So thanks everyone for your thoughts. And I've been taking notes, and I appreciate Ben, you kind of trying to pull out things. So I look forward to kind of reflecting back on that and ready for kind of round 2 here with everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Becky. And just lifting up, this has been one of the, just saying again, one of the things that this group really asked for is to get and I recognize the 4 days of review, but to get the rules early. And so this is meant to be a little bit of a messy conversation because it really is the first draft of rules that are meant to inspire the exact type of discussion that we're having. So I just want to kind of level set us all to say this should be a little bit messy. This is where these concerns should be raised, and it gives a lot of content then for DLCD to be able to kind of come back and say, how do we kind of build what we can into the next iteration? Destin, jump in.
I don't know if this belongs in this portion or the next portion, but I was also, is there information here that I missed about historic districts or historic adjacencies?
Becky?
No, if you have not missed that inclusion. So that's a great topic for discussion.
Did you want to name something, Justin?
Oh, no, just that I live in a historic district, and it would be pretty unbelievable if somebody came in and didn't respect that.
Okay. Thank you for naming it. So, all right, let's pivot to citing standards. Ariella, do you mind, or I think you're sharing? Yep, thank you. So I'll just reiterate the questions that we introduced earlier. So the first one, if floor area ratio were to be included as a standard, what elements would be important to incorporate? Do the proposed standards, these are citing standards, work with all types of residential developments? And then are there other standards that should be considered in this section? So just a reminder of what we're hoping to kind of lead into. Same kind of process. I do want to start again. There's implications. So I know that a lot of this conversation is focused on those kind of local jurisdictions, developers, et cetera. But everyone's welcome to jump in. I just know that there's disparate kind of impacts and implications for folks that are in this work every day. So with that as some context, love to open it up for thoughts and reflections. Yeah, Mary Kyle?
I'm sorry, I should probably know the answer to this, but on the citing standards under the sub 3 related to gross site area must be provided as outdoor area, et cetera. How does that relate to the requirement for courtyards in cottage clusters? Is that in addition to, I hope it's not a substitute for, because many of these are not courtyards, don't describe a courtyard. So I should probably know the answer to that, but I don't remember.
Becky, Ethan? Might be some scanning going on, Ethan.
Sorry, I was preoccupied. Mary Kyle, what was your question?
I wondered how in the citing standards, number 3 talks about the percentage of the gross area that has to be outdoor area and the various ways to achieve that. And I wondered how that relates to the courtyards that are supposed to be part of cottage developments. And I might well should know this, and I don't remember.
Sure. So those common courtyards that might be included in a cottage cluster development, for example, are likely to meet those standards, or those open space standards are helping to inform the final design of those common courtyards.
I guess I don't think that some of these would qualify as a courtyard, like balconies or things like that.
Yeah.
So I if some of these could qualify as a courtyard as opposed to a courtyard qualifying for the open space requirement or the outdoor area. I get that the courtyard should qualify as the outdoor area, but not all of these would qualify as a courtyard.
Sure. Right. Okay. Yeah, we can work on that connection and just make sure it works in the correct direction.
Okay.
And not like bilateral or bidirectional.
Yeah. An individual balcony is not a courtyard.
Right.
So thanks.
But an individual balcony is outdoor space?
Well, it does say they have to be available for use by all, but I'm not sure that all of these would qualify as the kind of commonly shared by everyone, easily accessible, communal type in the center kind of thing, courtyard. Whether it's has it on 3 sides or 2 sides or whatever, that's another layout issue, but the courtyard itself. So I guess it does include private open space, including balconies. So yeah, I don't think that's not a courtyard.
I'll just jump in that this was, lifted from the model code, and I think there's refinement there. So thank you for pointing this out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Marco. Morgan.
Thanks for pointing that out, Marco. I think it sort of points to the fact that the standards may want to be a little more differentiated by the different types of housing that you're addressing. So that's one thought. I also took the liberty of running some math on the 15% outdoor requirement, and if it is inclusive of the setback area, that's all you're going to get. And I've looked at 1,500 square foot lots all the way up to 20,000 square foot lots with a 5-foot perimeter setback, and that 5-foot perimeter is 15% in almost every single case except the extremely large lot. So it's intended to be additional to the setbacks. That should be clarified. So that's all I have about the outdoor area standards. I wanted to circle back on FAR, and I think, for Portland, this FAR requirement works very well. We have it graduated based on the number of units that are being proposed on a lot, and that's increased the diversity of housing that we're getting. It's increased the affordability of those units that we're getting because it results in smaller size lots as you increase the number, smaller size units as you increase the number of units. However, it was not an easy fight for us to get that adopted at the local level. Our implementers kicked up a fuss. It is not so simple for everyone to understand, to communicate, or to review. So it may not be super appropriate for a small jurisdiction that doesn't have the same sorts of resources. So, I mean, I think it's a really awesome and wonderful, valuable tool that I would love to retain in Portland because we've got a track record of its success. But I also don't want to foist it on smaller jurisdictions that may have trouble resourcing that kind of requirement. But if there is some kind of direction around FAR or unit size, I think maybe a simpler thing might be square footage by unit type, and then just kind of graduate it, maybe. Just with an eye toward increasing diversity of types of housing that you're getting, so you're not just replicating the same cookie cutter all the time, and with an eye toward decreased cost, increased affordability, as I think those are super important parts of the housing production objective.
Thanks, Morgan. Am I hearing the question was really about if floor area ratio were to be included? Are you in opposition of the inclusion? But if it's included, then consider these factors, or like how do I interpret the opening statement there?
Right. I acknowledge the confusion there. I think it goes back to sort of, we would love to retain it because it's been a very successful tool, and I'm concerned that if the rules don't include it, then we're not allowed to apply it. Okay. And then we lose that very valuable tool. But I also want to acknowledge the challenge that it would have for other jurisdictions. So it is a little bit of this thing.
Yeah, I think that's what I was picking up. Thanks for confirming. Alexandra, jump in.
To put a finer point on it, not all of our jurisdictions use FAR currently. And so that presents a huge issue when it comes to actually integrating this and implementing it with the rest of everything in our codes everywhere, and how your jurisdiction like processes data and all of those things, what permitting system they use, all of that has the potential to greatly conflict with this program, that we don't know what the utilization is going to be. So it either is going to force change of the systems that we're using semi-unintentionally, which is a huge cost to us, or similar to other things, there is an opportunity to say there's an FAR version depending on your jurisdiction and a non-FAR version, and simply create two predictable standards, but the creation of two standards based off the kind of code that you use.
But all jurisdictions use square footage? And this is my ignorance. Like, is there, like, what's the distinction with like FAR and square footage in your comment? Right, like if jurisdictions are looking at FAR, are they still looking at square footage as it relates to a lot?
It really depends on your jurisdiction.
Okay.
What you're using. So FAR would be your square footage versus your lot size. That's my understanding. Not a planner, once again.
What I would just throw in is FAR is a way to get to scale, to like address the scale of development on a lot. And so how we do it is not FAR at all. We do it with height limit and lot coverage requirements.
Okay.
And so based on that, I think FAR sort of fits into that whole list of things that I was mentioning earlier, including height and all that sort of stuff. And so if you incorporated FAR in it and let Morgan use his nice FAR approach, I feel like that's a good way to do it.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Ron. Brock, Cheryl?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with a couple of cities that have spoken here. Again, I think that kind of like FAR, if you use it, cool. If you use height and setback, cool. We're both talking about form, right? But we don't want to have to reinvent a wheel that's working, even if it has some kinks in it. But I think that's a good way to do it. Kind of separate that out. If you have FAR, here's your considerations around that. Maybe it's that 10%, right? But yeah, I agree.
So you're saying like there's a little bit of a both and or either or, right? If you're using FAR, you can kind of accomplish it through that mechanism, or you can start look at kind of height and other factors. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Cheryl?
Yeah, I would support that as well. Fred did an excellent job of describing it. We don't have an FAR, so requiring it would make it more complicated for these lots than it is currently on our other lots. I think that doesn't help the process. Also, just a couple of quick notes, just in siting standards in general. At least 15% of gross site area for outdoor area, is more restrictive now than what the county requires currently for middle housing, except for multifamily housing. And that's once again kind of where I think my staff will have more comments, just that difference between like what looks like middle housing versus when we start to get into those multifamily units, and that is a little bit different. My team also had a question, it mentions the minimum density requirements based off the comp plan, but is there a maximum density requirement proposed, or is that not part of, or is it any maximum density? I think that was a question they were confused about.
It does not contemplate a maximum density.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that clarity.
Thanks, Cheryl. Jill?
I wanted to point out that I think it's important to clarify that I don't know if jurisdictions are using FAR or height and coverage. City of Portland has all of the above, FAR and height and coverage, except for cottage clusters. So there you go.
Thanks, Jill. So when you think about the rules for all types of residential developments, or are there other standards that should be considered? And likely folks have named a lot of this stuff already, but just want to kind of be explicit about some of those other questions. Or DLCD, are you hearing anything that's in this conversation that's prompting you to have some additional follow-ups?
Not any particular follow-ups. I think I think I've definitely tried to take down some themes. I think, Cheryl, your point about what happens in instances where the Oregon home standards are more restrictive than, the standards on the ground. And we've actually heard that from other jurisdictions, as well, to that point. So it's a good question. And I think is, trying to craft a set of rules to limit that situation is maybe the best we could do, and try to avoid those as best we can. But I think there may be instances where that is possible. And hearing from local governments on where that exists now, in the proposed rules, is a great, great thing to hear, because we can then adjust those standards or pivot to a different approach entirely.
Okay. Brock?
Yeah, building on that a little bit, do you think it makes sense to maybe have something to the effect of, unless the existing standard is less restrictive than what's in the following rules, this is what applies. But that way, if your standard is less restrictive and it helps you enable more development there, right? Then that's something you can say, okay, we're keeping that, right, for setbacks, right, or for trash. But allowing it when it provides flexibility, just kind of trying to balance that, but in a simple way. Yeah.
Right. Flexibility towards development feasibility. Something. Yeah.
Thanks, Brock. Alexandra?
Yeah, I'll just kind of underline that where like I know we're trying to eliminate all possible variation and make it so very standard, but like, Ethan, you were there for the conversation we had with my policy committee where, the tree standards in this, which we're not there yet. Some of our cities don't have tree standards this strict. And so like this program makes it harder to develop things in certain jurisdictions and not like it universally cannot create a level playing field because of those variations, those very problems of like our housing laws do not apply evenly across jurisdictions. They're going to vary based on jurisdiction size. We are a home rule state, so different cities have different requirements. If you're west of the Cascades versus east of the Cascades, what your trees look like is different. Like all of those variety things are going to compound to make it so that you can never have this be exactly equal. I think that's one of the reasons why we all struggle so much with the way this bill is written and what its intent is and all of those things, is that it just kind of inherently doesn't make a ton of sense. It's been my biggest struggle with this one. Like, I think the design review portion of this should go to BCD and the site review should be at DLCD, because it does not make much sense for DLCD after the fact to try to dictate what the windows are. I'm just confused.
Thanks, Alexandra. Matt, did you want to jump in? Cheryl?
I'm happy to wait until Cheryl.
Okay. Yeah, Cheryl.
Yeah, once again, such great discussion. I really I just one word of caution is where if we go to something, unless it's less restrictive, then it might lead to a case where staff and developers are trying to bounce between two different sets of rules, and that will not make it faster. Everyone will be confused. I know when middle housing started, we were really all struggling because of like, how do we build this in this area on a rural collector? And I think that could be more challenging. I'm just wondering if this maybe this isn't the one. While it could be applied across the state, it may not be the best tool in that jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions, this may not be the tool. Our staff are perfectly okay helping a customer and they say, hey, I think I want to build under the Oregon homes thing. I said, it would be easier for you to just do a middle housing development with a triplex. Let's make it easy on you. We can help you do that. We couldn't tell them no if they insisted on it, but we would definitely steer them towards that direction. Because I just think it's tough to make everything square because we all are so different, and that's what makes Oregon Oregon.
Maddie, jump in.
Thanks. Maddie Phillips, Public Facilities Planner with the Housing Division. I haven't said anything yet in the conversation, but I've been listening intently, and I really appreciate the conversation that we've had today. As a former local government planner in a small jurisdiction, I have wrestled with a lot of the same themes that you've raised. I think that the question that I wanted to bring back to the forefront of this group, just briefly, I know we put it in the design section of the questions, but I hear I hear a focus on the uniqueness of different communities, and Cheryl, you summarized a lot of my thoughts almost to a point, so I'm glad you said them and put them in the room. Is replicability. Like there's a way for us to create a system that allows for replicating a standard design without losing some of those local nuances. So there will be places where these standards will be more strict or more stringent. It'll be harder to do that project in a jurisdiction that favors or encourages a certain type of development, but it allows replicability across all. Someone said it earlier in the design conversation about submitting the same drawings, but like in one community you'll get a note sheet, and in another community you'll get an approval. And I think that speaks to the thing we're trying to iron out, which is how can the same design be replicated, knowing that some developers use a similar or the same house design in a number of different communities and want to streamline that. So I think it would be helpful if there are things like that you could pull out related specifically to siting of the building. If there are things that haven't come to the forefront in this conversation about how to be able to, maybe specifically as local government, to review plans. Sometimes you review the same plan more than once in your experience working with a particular developer. And then there are applicants in this room that may have applied for the same project in multiple jurisdictions. Are there ways that we can think about encouraging replicability across jurisdictions that we haven't raised here, specifically related to siting? So I hear this conversation about floor area ratio or massing of the building. That's one thing. Are there other criteria or other characteristics that help apply the same project to different sites that might help a city or jurisdiction streamline that or replicate that, so that the developer has one design that they want to put on 5 different sites? Each of those sites is going to have some unique characteristics, but are we missing anything in how that's able to be replicated over those 5 lots with the same building type?
Thanks, Maddie. So maybe for our builders in the room, or what's been your experience, or for our jurisdictions, what's made that maybe easier or harder? Yeah, Destin.
Yeah, I would just underline what you said. I think it's fabulous, right? We're trying to figure out what we're solving, I think is crucial. And obviously the ministerial review is fabulous for developers because we hit completely different land use processes in completely different locations for very variable reasons, and quite often NIMBY reasons. So, and again, don't love laying code on top of code if we can avoid it. Really love the idea of trying to standardize things and perhaps in ways that, again, like the model code, that jurisdictions could adopt it if they believed and felt like it was making things simpler and they were getting more housing built in their community associated with it. So I think that's a really good focus and really good way of centering, again, the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Jill?
I fear I might be complicating things, but I've just been thinking, if you're really, I don't know if it's really that hard as an architect to revise a unit design like in a small way. Like if I had to take away a foot on one side, or I had to increase the size of the windows to make it work in a different jurisdiction. So you're talking about siding requirements. Yeah, I guess for siding requirements, maybe you have to lose a unit because of the setbacks, or maybe you have to increase increase the size to make the coverage work. The real problem from jurisdiction to jurisdiction is not within the scope of this project. It's utilities and infrastructure. That's what makes it hard to do a project from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So, I mean, I guess the cost to pay a designer or an architect to revise the design, I think, is actually kind of the small barrier. However, having said that, I think it would be confusing if one jurisdiction I had to calculate the FAR, but then in the other jurisdiction it was square footage, and then it would maybe be off. That feels annoying, but not unsurmountable.
I don't know if avoiding annoyance was part of the legislative intent or not, but no, thanks for framing it that way. Any other reflections, TLC, any other prompts?
Just to express some appreciation from Jill about bringing up the issue of utilities, my own area of expertise being at the forefront there. But it's something that if there are ways to ensure, I know Cheryl, you brought up right-of-way dedication requirements in the front setback. That's an example of where there's a way to build a standard that could be replicated across many different types of lots and in many different contexts that would help ensure the opportunity for installation of utilities. If there are any other similar or parallel types of standardization that we can add to the criteria, then we're looking for that. I think, Jill, if I read between the lines of your comment, it's not that we can't change the design. Sometimes it's that we might need to know what those things are ahead of time, or know what to expect, and perhaps knowing what to expect helps us design something that can be placed in a variety of different jurisdictions.
That was well said. That was better said than what I said. Yes, I would agree. Predictability.
Ethan?
Okay, so I'm chewing on these things. Very, very helpful discussion. Thank you. I think one of the, like the standardization of the benefit of the Oregon Homes program is the only part that is not standard here is the lots. The actual individual development scenario that we're talking about. And what I think I'm hearing from folks is that the application of a standardized set of either siting standards or design standards is one thing, but the considerations on the actual individual development scenario can't be kind of accounted for in those standardized, or is difficult to account for in those standardized siting and design standards. So I'm just trying to, one, maybe am I hearing that correctly? And two, need to think on that further in the next round of rules. And particularly how to solve it. I'll some wild idea like Morgan has provided and others have provided.
I mean, I do just going back to Morgan's idea from earlier. I mean, and you said it yourself, Ethan. You said something about the two things that unlock the thing. Well, it seems to me that we're talking about sort of two different issues, and we've sort of conflated them both. We're talking about the lot and the house itself. And I think that we could think separately about each of those to actually make the program work together. And I think that what Morgan said earlier today, which I agree with, is, deferring to the local jurisdiction with things specifically related to the lot makes a ton of sense. But perhaps there's ways to standardize the house that that we haven't quite gotten to yet. So
jump in.
No, Morgan, please.
Yeah, Morgan.
Well, yeah, thanks, Fred. I I think there are still ways to standardize some of the aspects about the lot. I mean, the standards that apply to the lot as well within DLCD rulemaking to create. Well, I mentioned this floors and ceilings sort of thing, and you kind of got some hint of that in some jurisdictions have lesser requirements than what's being proposed in the standards, and maybe there's a way through the rulemaking to kind of prescribe that band. The setbacks can't be less than 5. Well, that's a bad example. Setbacks can't be more than 15 feet, but you can be less, or whatever it is. That you can kind of give some direction to the cities to create their own standardized approach for how the rules will apply to the lots, sort of independent and in concert with all the other standards that we got to bring along with it. So there's the zoning and development codes, but they're all sorry, Jill, all the frontage improvement requirements, all the utility stuff that comes along, and all those have play and implications on how things get laid out on the site. It's not something we're going to have a rubber stamp in a DLCD rule for. I think there needs to be some flexibility to account for that. The structure itself, I think that's, I think we can say, hey, we create a good set of standards that apply to that, and let that thing just be replicated, and that seems consistent with the intent of the bill. You've created your model and you can replicate that, but there's going to be site specific situations within parameters that are established by DLCD that we can review more appropriately at the local level. So, just probably saying the same thing I already said.
Yeah, appreciate that, Morgan. Ethan? Any last thoughts in this section? Otherwise, we'll take a break and then come back in. Jill, jump in.
Yeah, I was just about to say what Morgan basically said about jurisdictions. Tell me if this is too much, but if maybe each jurisdiction creates their own criteria specifically for more homes. And I know I'm sensitive to not wanting to add more work to local jurisdictions, but if somehow it's just with the idea of making it predictable. So if somebody knows they want to build in Silverton, Oregon, could they go and talk to that jurisdiction and find out, well, what are the kind of main criteria I need to think about before going further down? I think that could be helpful. I also am thinking that maybe it is starting to feel like height, like there maybe needs to be a maximum height for buildings. Thinking about like the local acceptance of providing these buildings. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Any last comments for this piece? Kathy?
I was just going to say on that last comment, depending on where you are, the height is tied to fire capacity for our fire departments. And so we don't all have the capacity for anything above 4 stories, perhaps. So that's going to be jurisdictional, right? So this particular rules don't get into that specifically. So those design standards also, depending on where the lot sits, come into play for a variety, not just on height, but also setbacks and distance between things. So that's another issue that I don't know that we're prepared to deal with in this.
Thanks, Kathy. Alexandra?
Yeah, my executive director would yell at me if I didn't bring this up, as she is the spouse of a firefighter. Different jurisdictions have different sizes of fire trucks. And if you don't have a fire truck that can access a development, like this goes back to like our whole like fire code discussion on this one. A new fire truck is like $1 million. Most of our jurisdictions don't have the capacity to buy that just because they have new developments going in that are not in compliance with their current existing fire trucks, or the roads are narrower than their fire trucks can do, or any of those variety things that can end up happening that can mean that the residences are not safe.
Thank you. Okay. Well, let's take a break. We're 1 minute past my designated break time, but that was pretty darn close. So let's take 10 minutes. We'll come back at 11:01 and we'll move into a conversation around local government implications and local review process. See you in 10. All right, we're officially at 11:01. Welcome folks back. A thumbs up or camera on or some indication that you're back in the room would be wonderful. And we'll dive right back into the conversation. Becky, I didn't know if you wanted to give any additional context for this discussion. Otherwise, we'll just jump right into it. Or Ethan? Any additional? Okay, let's just jump in then. So I'll review the questions we're hoping to get to have some discussion around. So for the local review process, are the rules as drafted as clear and objective as they possibly could be? If representing a local government, would a public facilities or traffic impact analysis review be required of an Oregon homes development? And then the third prompt, if representing a local government, do you feel that Oregon home applications can be integrated seamlessly into your existing intake and review structure? And if not, really want to talk through and hear the challenges that would emerge. So take it where you want to go. I'm going to also, just for folks that maybe don't do this work every single day, before we close today, I will open up just some space if there's other kind of aspects or portions of the rules that you're interested in bringing up or giving input on. Maddie, I saw you come off mute. Did you want to add something? Or is that an accidental unmute? Okay, that might have been accidental unmuting. So let's open it up. Let's start maybe with our local jurisdictions who are doing these review processes. What's your thoughts, reflections, concerns, hopes, aspirations? Yeah, Morgan.
I was waiting. I didn't want to be first.
You're perfect first. Let's go.
So I think we've already described some of the challenges around the clear and objectivity of the standards. And so I think there's just a little bit of round 2 or round 3 refinement needed there. So I don't want to belabor that point. I'll just speak for Portland on the traffic impact analysis and the public facilities review. Generally, these are not going to be required for 11 unit and under developments, but there are cases like traffic impact we're not going to study. But there may be operational challenges that require what is it? Not a traffic study. Well, I'm missing the term, but basically like an access study or a traffic report or something like that. So not impact, but it generally relates to where you're taking vehicle access, like on a busy street or a sharp blind curve or that kind of thing. And finally, on the process, I think there's some very substantial problems with the rules in the process. So the rules require a clear and objective review. Totally get it. And I'm totally fine with that. And I think that's the objective. But then it talks about it being reviewed as a land use decision, and that contradicts statutory definitions of land use decisions. So RS 197.015 defines what a land use decision, and it excludes things that are made ministerially without exercising discretion. So leave it as ministerial. That's cool, but don't describe it as a land use decision. And there's implications because of that. The rules also state that no notice shall be required. Again, that's consistent with how we would approach a ministerial decision in Portland, although I think that particular assertion is beyond DLCD statutory authority in 2258, and it also contradicts House Bill 4037. So again, no issue for us, but something that you might want to look at. And then I already spoke about this idea of, in terms of seamlessly moving into a process. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how we're going to integrate this into our code, and how we would make the review process happen. How much of that is in our code versus just maybe applying it direct. I don't really know. And I kind of want to wait until the rules settle out a little bit before I try to decide how seamless it is. But at the moment, it's not going to be seamless at all because we're really dealing with like 2 different codes. So Just my perspective on that.
Morgan, just real quick. So when you reference a land use decision, is that literally just a strike through of the reference? Does that solve that, or is there different language that?
Well, it might be a question for the DLCD staff. I think there's an intention to make any sort of appeal go through a LUBA process. I'm not sure if that's the case, but that wouldn't be the way to do it. So,
yeah, Ethan.
The other part there is 2258 articulates local governments making land use decisions to approve Oregon home development. So I think your point's well taken though, Morgan, about just how that functionally operates, and maybe it's not, capital LUD land use decision. It's just a decision that a local government is making related to land use.
Yeah, we'll let DLCD and probably some lawyers talk through the language there. Brock?
Yeah, so from that standpoint, right, ministerial approval, if that counts as a lowercase land use decision, I almost wonder if with the bill we were given, it makes sense to really kind of go Occam's razor on this, right? From the standpoint of, okay, we know the lots that this applies to, we know the types that it applies to under 3 and 4 in the bill. I almost wonder if the simplest way to do this is to say, okay, if you meet the bill criteria 3 and 4, those standards that are there, right? Knowing that public facilities, traffic impact, are ones that we're not looking at, as long as it fits within the code, the local code, and it is one of those lots and one of those housing types, it just becomes a ministerial approval. And I know that feels like a big shift away from where we're going here, but the reason that I say that is because the way that this is written, the commission may specify for the approved residential development types allowed under the section, the processes that can be applied, right? I can interpret that as being a ministerial process, right? And then the applicable design standards, variations or adjustments, limits on land use components like density, parking, standards for tree removal. I almost wonder if what we want to do is say, hey, looking at A, we want it to be a ministerial process. Looking at B and C, as long as it fits within the code, thumbs up, right? D, I'll have to think about a little bit more, and E, maybe setting, some kind of like threshold standards there. But like really just getting this to the bones and saying like, hey, we are looking for a ministerial process for infill development, which is basically what we're looking at here, right? Since we have all these different, kind of jurisdiction by jurisdiction variations, I almost wonder if it makes the most sense to just say, hey, we are going to create, a set of standards. It's basically just like, this is a ministerial approval, right? Because we're not going to see this for huge things. The largest lot that can apply here is a half acre, right? And so we're really talking about like one-off developments at that infill scale. And just saying like, if it meets your code, if it is an eligible type on an eligible lot, that's a ministerial approval. I wonder if that's the simplest way to go forward with it. And I'm not hard set on this. I'm just kind of thinking about it as we're discussing it. And so I'd love to hear some more feedback around that, particularly from our local governments. But I almost wonder if by doing more than we need to, if we're forcing ourselves to do more than we want to, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Rob. Who is it was, you used a phrase like, if it meets your standards, whose standards are it? The cities?
Yeah, within the city, right? If it meets the clear and objective standards of the city, it's a ministerial approval.
Other thoughts, reflections, either on Brock's comments or others from the prompts? Yeah, Eric?
Just a few of my own specific comments. So, public infrastructure. I know Jill mentioned this, and it's kind of I think a theme that's coming up. I wasn't sure if the completeness items that are listed here would require showing the proposed public infrastructure, meaning really basic stuff is what I'm talking about, sidewalks, street trees, things like that. I'd recommend that. Um, I know infrastructure is always tough. I think that the good thing in this situation is that we are looking at mostly infill lots, to Brock's point, half acre max size. So I think there should be an expectation that these are limited frontages and that frontage requirements are likely, frontage improvements are likely to be required. So what what I would recommend based on our experience doing plan review is require that at a minimum, either through like a statement that they plan to provide that, or if they don't plan to provide the public infrastructure, just to prompt that conversation. What's likely to happen if they don't propose it up front, or say that they're not going to, they're likely going to get a condition of approval to provide those with proportionality findings potentially. And what I've noticed is just having that conversation up front is really good. About goes back to predictability for the developer. What we don't like to do is not have a conversation about it up front, or have an expectation that infrastructure is needed, and then they get a condition of approval that they need to do all these things, and then they're really upset. And then they want to appeal, and it delays the time frame, things like that. So even just a line item of proposed public improvements as a completeness item, I think would help. The only other comment, public notice. I think we had talked about this in a last meeting. I had indicated that, Sherwood's preference at times may be to do public notice, even if there's no appeal process. And really what that's about is just informing the neighbors and the community about what's happening in their community. And I totally understand the concerns around NIMBY and, opponents without a lot of delaying things, or without a lot of there in terms of what the proposal is. I just think generally where the state has been going is less and less public notice, including public hearings. And I just think it's from Sherwood's opinion, we shouldn't fear informing the community about what is happening in their community. To say that people don't have a right to know about development, it's just odd to me. It's anti-democratic to me, even if they don't have a right to appeal it. I think people knowing what's happening in their community is a good thing. People just want to know what's happening. All of a sudden, someone starts digging, someone starts doing something. At least they know, because what they're going to do anyways, they're going to call us anyways. And so if we can be proactive and inform people, I think that's good. What I heard during the last meeting is that there wasn't opposition to allowing a local government to do public notice if they chose, but not requiring a public, but also not precluding it. That's what I heard at the last meeting, but I didn't see it here in the draft rules. Thanks.
Yeah, there's a section, I think, on page 4, number 6. It just says a local government is not required to publish a public notice in reviewing or approving an application for Oregon home development. So it strips out the requirement, but I think Eric maybe look at it to make sure that it's still permissible. Right?
Maybe that's my misunderstanding. Would a ministerial approval preclude that notice?
At the local government folks for that one.
The HB 4037 limits the amount of notice, so it limits it to property owners within 100 feet, but it doesn't preclude it.
Thank you.
Brock, was your question like for a ministerial review, which basically just kind of streamlines a process? Could you do that and public notice? Like, do those things go hand in hand? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I guess I wasn't sure if Eric was following up on my comment or if it was a little bit of a separate one. Eric, if I got confused there,
I
that's
think mostly separate. I think I just the way the language was written, I guess I wasn't sure. I could read it both ways, that it was precluding an allowance of public notice or that it was allowing public notice. So I guess maybe just clarifying whether a local government can voluntarily provide it is what I'd be looking for.
Yeah, Ethan?
Yeah, hopefully Becky can answer that question. But I think, we heard it last meeting in terms of the discussion around notice and again today. So we've got some more thinking to do around how that shows up in the rules, I think.
Yeah, anything to add, Becky?
Yeah, I think there's so many things to balance in this work in terms of honoring local government jurisdiction, purview, while also meeting the intent of the bill and creating, smooth development across the state. And we're hearing a lot today about how that may be a more difficult outlook than we initially thought. But yeah, I'll just specifically around public comment, I think that is something that we're going to have to continue to consider, in that we don't want to over, the whole NIMBY conversation. Again, there's just a lot to consider there.
Yeah, just to be clear, it wouldn't be public comment, it would just be public notice. So I'm not proposing that the public is able to comment or appeal, just that the rules do not preclude a local government from informing neighbors about development that's happening around them. And so far, the state has continued to preclude local governments from informing neighbors about what's happening in their community.
Yeah, then 4037 connection is one that we'll definitely dive into.
Okay. Thanks for bringing that back up, Eric. Let's go Cheryl, then Alexandra.
Thanks. I have kind of some just general notes from my team on the local review section. I guess kind of a technicality. It notes in that section, I think it's 3B, that when shall deem complete applications that have the following. One of those B says plans approved by the building codes division that meet applicable building code standards. I think that would, going back to our original conversation, I think it could be all plans, because if, how does that work if somebody's bringing in their own design plans that fit the square footage? They would be submitting a separate building permit. So just something to note there. We had some concerns about the site plan criteria as outlined. I realize those are coming from the bill, but we just wanted to make sure that wasn't the only criteria we can put in a site plan, because the site plan is part of the deeming it complete. Things like septic systems, once again, we need that shown on a site plan. We need to know how far it is from the septic system. If they're, how far it is between structures, all that kind of stuff laid out. So just things to think about, those logistics, to make sure we know what's going on the site and we can do an adequate review in that ministerial process. We had some questions about timelines to deem these complete, and what if they're incomplete? Do we void it? Do we go through a regular process? Just clarity on that would be awesome. And lastly, one of the questions that's been thrown around a lot about this is, what happens if someone wants to add to these structures later? The rules limit the size and other setting criteria. So how do we address that in the future? Because if you build it under the Oregon home, then we're assuming you're still under that. If you come in and you say, hey, we want to do an addition, we want to bump it out a little bit, we want to add this thing, we're not sure how to manage that, and because this will go into perpetuity. So just some thoughts from my team.
Yeah, really good ones, especially on the redevelopment potential. We'll have to figure out the answer to that question. But then on the public facilities review, I'm curious to hear what other things fall into that category. Distance from septic systems and utility lines and that kind of stuff, I think is a really interesting set of information. Like that information is necessary for the local government to make the other, sets of reviews and approvals. So we need to make sure that that package is sufficient to be able to conduct those reviews. So that would be, if you've got a list of those things, we'd be all ears.
Sure. Yeah, we'll see what we can do. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and Cheryl, just when your question around when it's incomplete, what happens? Did you have a record, like did your team or you have a recommendation for what you would want to see, or is it just an unanswered question that's not?
I think it's an unanswered question. I mean, if somebody comes in with something complete and they're doing a ministerial at the counter, it's usually like, you're incomplete. Why don't you come back? We'll help you out. We'll give you information. But we can't take it as opposed to going through one of our other types where we are doing the formal deeming incomplete, providing notice, providing time. There's a set process in law, and that's really well dictated.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I think it just becomes a tracking issue for us. Then you have to, once again, then we're going to track them in that whole process. That's way more complicated than a building permit review of yes or no, we can sign off or we can't.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Alexandra and then Eric, I saw your hand up and down, so you can jump back in if you want. Alexandra?
I think there's been some discussion of this, which is the intersection that this has with 4037. I think perhaps the cleanest way to deal with this is to simply rely on some of the 4037 statutes as to how exactly you address the noticing and all of that for these homes. So we're not creating additional different standards across the board for different kinds of housing. And just creating instead like a single standard that is quite narrow already. It is not, a full public hearing and notice and all of that for everything, but it is standardized, if that is in fact our goal, and also just makes it a little bit cleaner for our local jurisdictions to implement, regardless of whether or not we like 4037 and its noticing requirements. I think just having standardization makes it the implementation cleaner. Yeah, that's really all I got for you on this one.
Thanks, Alexandra. Your thoughts in this section? Yeah, Morgan?
So I noticed in the rulemaking, there's some sections that seem to just sort of drag over the language from the 2258. And I believe Eric made the comment before. Well, anyways, someone made the comment before about the lists and being read as an and or an or. That's missing in this statute, in a number of these lists. And it creates, there's cases where you can't read it as an and or an or because neither work. So you have to like insert an and somewhere and insert an or somewhere. I implore you to use this rulemaking process to straighten some of that out. Like the confusion around what is an Oregon lot and what is an Oregon development. Like use the statute as your guide and clarify it, and use rulemaking, use codifying language that logically makes sense, that uses the right prepositions or conjunctions in the list, so we understand what we're talking about. That's my comment.
Yeah. Thanks, Morgan. Other comments, thoughts? From a process to integration, like on a day-to-day basis, do you all feel like or have a clear understanding of how this would fit in your existing day-to-day? I guess the word the DLCD used was seamlessly. I guess what would contribute to maintaining seamless process versus what could get in the way. So I guess like as you're thinking about the rules and integration, are there unique challenges that just you'd want to name? Cheryl, jump in.
Yeah, I guess I'll try for jurisdiction people. I'll try for us. Seamless is conceptual. The more we have single carve out entities, to do on single lots, it's not as seamless as like middle housing, which we're doing everywhere. So will we make it work? Absolutely. It's what we do. We like helping people build buildings. That's our job. But it just means what it means when we have a separate process for middle housing, a separate process for Oregon homes, a separate process for this. We have to adopt the code, which is time consuming, and we have to go through all of our processes. And then we have to integrate it into our existing services and be able to explain it clearly and support our customers through that process and track it appropriately. Hence the question of like in perpetuity, what does this mean? Because then we're having to find a system to track these homes to make sure in the future that we can make sure we apply the right rules. And so I think that's where some of us are saying, you know, how do we do this to make this where we're not just trying to add more process for appreciating where we want to go. We all want to build more housing. I just think we're making it really complicated.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Yeah, I guess I'm just gonna jump in with the local review process. I think I'm kind of confused about the whole local government review. It's kind of hard for me to weigh in on it right now when I still have some confusion about the design and the siting standards and how those work. And I feel like if those things were clear, perhaps I would have more substantial feedback about this section.
Thanks, Fred.
I think that's fair. I wonder if I could go, Ben, I'm looking at time. How are we doing on time?
Yep. We're good. So
Okay.
we can go somewhere and then maybe one more conversation, and then we can open it up for any other thoughts that people had around the rules more generally.
I was gonna, go a little off script and queue up this question about the variances and adjustment and just the framework that's using, because it does have a connection to the review process. So typical, overgeneralization, but typical development review process when there is a variance or adjustment request is that there are standards by which a builder might, need to kind of prove up on the variances and adjustments to the local government to state the case, and for the local government to review against standards and make a decision on whether or not to approve that variance or adjustment. And I think what I wanted to point out, the difference in approach here is that those adjustments or variances to those what we'll call baseline standards is just baked in to that decision-making process, where the standard for a setback might be, in tall buildings 10 feet, but there is just kind of an understanding through this variance process that's articulated in these rules that you can vary from that standard up to 10%. And if that standard is varied by 10%, then the adjustment is granted. And so it's kind of creating this, like, it's drawing the line in the sand in terms of the baseline standard, but there's this flexibility on either side of that baseline number that's within the approval range, I guess I'll call it, within the spectrum of approval. So I just wanted to kind of highlight the structure there and see if that's feeling right, or if there's additional things to consider there, or how that's landing with folks. So it would not kick it into a separate review at the local government level. The standard would be 10 plus 10% or 5 plus 10%, for example.
So from an approach standpoint, any reflections or feedback? Yeah, Morgan?
I don't mean to always be negative in this, but I'll have more constructive. Well, this is intended to be constructive feedback.
Yes, very much.
I don't understand the point. If there's no analysis or criteria to weigh the request against, then you're just creating a process to get something you're automatically going to be given. It's sort of like the 1537 problem. Why is there another hoop to jump through? If the answer is going to be yes, just create the standard for what the standard is and incorporate the 10% if that's where you want to go. I mean, if there's some reason, if there has to be a reason given or some justification given, and we need to kind of evaluate that, even if it's try to be as clear and objective as that as you can be. I don't understand why we would want to burden local governments with an additional kind of level of review if there's nothing to decide there. So that's my feedback.
Thanks, Morgan. Eric, jump in.
No, sorry if there's other
Well,
folks
I
that
saw
want to-
Eric, you had come off mute, so I just wanted to invite you in.
Yeah, I'd maybe reinforce a little bit of what Morgan said. Like usually when we see variances, they're in order to address a specific site planning or design concern. So for example, if you don't get the 10%, then a tree will need to be removed. But if you are granted the 10%, then you can protect that tree. So that's usually how we see variances. So that's what I think we prefer to see, is that they're used as sort of a relief valve for to address certain design aspects or site specific site conditions. But 10% is not a huge amount, so I appreciate the limitation on the amount that can be achieved in the variance.
Thanks,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Fred. Yeah, please.
Yeah. One thing I would just say is I think just certain things should be standards. Like, I mean, if, for example, setbacks are going to 5 feet, allowing 10% reduction of 5 feet is pretty short. Right. So perhaps we should just keep certain things standards.
Sure, fair. I think Morgan, to your point, I think I'm envisioning it how that would function the same way you are, but it's just called out in its own section. So maybe it's like I call it semantics or the formatting or where it lives within the code, but I don't think the intention was not to create a separate review. It's just to say, here is the standard and there's some flexibility on either side of that in those instances where that flexibility is going to make sense or is necessary. And like we could change that and just delete the variance section and just put a preamble up in the citing standard that says the same thing. But that's how it was intended to function. And then I don't mean to call you out, Lee, but you had indicated you had the little clap emoji to Morgan's statement. So I'm genuinely curious from a builder's perspective, like how that's landing with you.
So I'm afraid this is going to be off topic, so I'm going to try to keep it short. But I have a lot of experience with the mandatory adjustments under 1537, which, unlike Morgan, I am a huge fan of. Yeah, you're muted, but I know what you're saying.
I'm not a fan. It's yeah. Anyways, we'll come back to
Yeah.
that.
He's not a fan. He's not a fan. But my issue with those is really along the lines of what Morgan said, which is if you're going to make these adjustments mandatory, why are you making me jump through these hoops? Because every adjustment I apply for costs me roughly $3,000 in fees and probably another $2,000 in consultant time. So that's, and since we top out at 10 adjustments per project, right? So that's an extra $50,000 that I'm spending that is just really unnecessary. Please just change the standards. Don't make me do all this paperwork for no reason.
Agreed, and this would not require any additional paperwork or review. The way that we strove to thread the needle there. If we missed it, then that's on us. But the purpose is, like, another way you could read that is the standard is 5 plus or minus 10%. Like we could write that in the citing standard section. it just happens to be like in a different section to call out variances and adjustments explicitly.
And
Yeah.
if I could just jump in, kind of like if we did just include the 10% variance allotment within the standards, and then there's no sections that says variances and adjustments, is that going to be kind of a red flag for folks reading these rules of like, oh wow, there's no flexibility, versus calling it out as a section that there is that little bit of wiggle room? Just kind of curious how that would land for folks looking at these rules of like, hey, there's no variance section. What do you mean there's no flexibility?
Yeah, Morgan.
I'm hoping, so my main objection with the proposed variances is that there's no thing there. You're not demonstrating any kind of need. So if you don't need to demonstrate a need, like, I don't know why, to Lee's point, like, why waste the time having a standard that you automatically get and a little extra? Like, just make that the standard. However, that 10% is not a lot. 6 inches in a 5-foot setback. You might need to do more than that. And we have variance processes. All these cities across Oregon have adjustments and variance processes that if you need to, all the statute says is you have to create a process, or you have to direct a process to allow for variances and adjustments. Well, allowing the standard underlying process, including 1537 if it's applicable, does that. If you want the additional stuff, and where you might need to factor in other things like hardship or whatever it is, intent and whatnot. So just that sort of by right kind of adjustment is and this is part of why I'm not a fan of that, or not such much fan of 1537. It's just like, it's kind of it's just an exercise in futility a little bit. So trying to reduce that amount of just thinking and process, and even if it's not a separate add-on process to the building permit, just streamline that as much as you can.
Yeah, fair.
Jill?
I guess I'm representing builders. So I just know for my projects, which, just to reiterate, they're smaller infill projects, like 2 8-unit projects. They're one-off things. We're never doing adjustments. So like, we're designing the project to not have to do an adjustment because they take so long. That's the main thing. So yeah, so I guess thinking about smaller projects, like the adjustment thing is kind of just like a non-issue for me because I'm just not really dealing with it.
That's helpful. Thanks, Jill. I'm wondering, it's about 11:40. I'd love to just invite, I know we were really intentional today about structuring this conversation about focused on where we imagined a lot of the interest, comments, and implications discussion would be. And so I think we've had a robust conversation around that. I did want to just invite folks, if there was other sections of the rules or other things that are coming up for you that you just wanted to bring in, and just spend a few minutes just asking folks, particularly folks that maybe are outside of the kind of developer local jurisdiction, if there's things that you're seeing or if things that you've heard today that you'd like to bring into the space. Yeah, Kathy?
Yeah, I just had this is just a general request for future planning. If the developers in the room could consider some of the home types that exist in other places. So out here on the coastal area, it would be really great to have New England style walk-ups, 3-story walk-ups with each level being an independent home. And that model I have not seen yet, would work fabulously, especially in our downtown redevelopment area that we're looking to include density. And I'm just not seeing that model out here. It's prevalent back east on the East Coast for a reason. It allows multi-generational housing, it allows density, and it allows smaller units to take up less land space. And that's what we need out here on the coast, especially with our slope lots and our difficult terrain. So if somebody out there could start including that type of housing, we don't want condos. We're talking about independent units in a 3-story walk-up would be fabulous.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Any other reflections or thoughts on rules? Yeah, Eric.
Thanks. Just really quickly, wanted to go back to the infrastructure piece. I was just thinking about with a lot of these lots being infill, right-of-way dedication as well. It's not something we've really talked about. So, you know, with this, our assumption would be that the setback requirement is from the property line after right-of-way dedication. And so maybe clarifying that would be good. And I don't know if there'd be developer concerns. I know right dedication is never popular, plus improvements are never popular. From our perspective, I guess in local jurisdiction, we've established a TSP, transportation system plan, and we have an established and proposed, final right-of-way cross section for that street. So it shouldn't be moving the goalposts on the developer or on the property owner. It should be clear when they're looking at, potentially purchasing that lot, what the required right-of-way dedication is going to be. And it just goes back to Cheryl's comment earlier. I think people are going to be property owners of these homes. The new buyers are going to be really frustrated, and the city's going to be really frustrated if we have to come in 5 or 10 years and purchase property from them or take property from them, and take their front yard from 5 feet or 10 feet to 0 or 5 feet. So somehow making sure that the right of way dedication is allowed through the process would be really good.
Right.
Quick follow-up to that. Is there a way that you as a community, without someone coming in for a pre-application meeting, is there a way that you notify landowners of that, of the expansion, the idea that you may be expanding a right-of-way because your TSP calls for it? Is it an easement? Is it a note on the deed? How does one find out about that without coming in, calling you up and asking?
Like if they're interested in purchasing and then developing, knowing what the right-of-way dedication would be?
Well, a way to provide that information ahead of individual. I guess we're thinking about like if a developer buys 5 lots, how does he or she know that 2 of the lots will have a substandard roadway that's likely to be improved within the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, well, ideally, they would be aware that they are doing the frontage improvements as part of their development, first. After that, I mean, it just goes back to basic planning and site design. So they could pull the existing right-of-way cross-section from surveys. I mean, ideally, they have a surveyor as well. So they'd pull the existing right-of-way width, and then they would look at our TSP and compare the existing width to the proposed width, and they would know what's going to be required. Does that answer the question?
Would that get
I think I'm fishing for something else, but I can follow up with you. It's something that is it's an issue that is raised often, that is very challenging to address in knowing what the city knows before one embarks on a development proposal.
I mean, we have a CIP plan, so we have a 5 and 20-year CIP. So if that capital improvement is on the CIP plan, they'll know that it's coming up. But again, these are infill lots. If a developer is expecting not to do frontage improvements with an Oregon home, I'd have a lot of concern because these are infill lots, and
not the question.
Well, it's related though. So I think it almost addresses the concern where the developer needs to build the right of way to the final right of way line in the TSP. And that gets around this issue. What I didn't want to happen is them not dedicate right of way or not do frontage improvements, and then the city comes in the future. So that was my concern. But ideally, I think we all want livable neighborhoods with housing development. So sidewalks, pedestrian connectivity, street trees, things like that. So hopefully that's always on the table with these Oregon homes.
Would that come through in one of two, or maybe a combination of maybe both, the traffic impact analysis review and the public facilities review? Like, do you feel like that's still present?
Yeah, public facilities.
Right.
TIA is related to traffic, so we wouldn't. I agree with Morgan. We probably wouldn't do a TIA for 12 units. But public facilities review, which would include frontage improvements, we would try to capture it through that process.
Just for clarification, Eric, I was trying to get to the comment you made specifically that echoed Cheryl's comment earlier, which is that the front setback starts at the point of the future right-of-way width, not the existing.
Yeah.
And to know that, there'd be like a set of things that a developer would need to know ahead of time. Thank you.
Thanks, Maddie. Thanks, Eric. Brock?
Yeah, I'll be really quick on that. I have a feeling it's probably outside the scope of this specific rulemaking, but is that something that should be referenced when we're doing a BLI? Right? For example, if you know that a buildable lot is going to have or is planned to have, an adjustment to the right of way like that, could that just be like a flag on it, just saying like, hey, expect the right of way to move 5 feet to the west?
Well, maybe there may be a
Great point, and a
Is that
good
a-
placeholder, Brock.
placeholder. Okay, I think, Maddie, maybe that's the way to answer the scope question. Ethan, were you gonna?
Same thing.
Okay. I'm sure you'll find a place, Brock, to have that conversation. Both, there you go. Reach out to Maddie. I did want to, if I don't see any other hands, I wanted to, spend the last few minutes before we work into closing to do a bit of a temperature check. And I want to be really clear. I'm not asking folks to vote right now, and I will never ask us to vote in a rulemaking process. But wanted to give a bit of a temperature check, given this conversation, and some of this is an ask maybe of future imagination, but in a really simple way, I'm trying to think about thumbs up, thumbs sideways. So if folks are not on camera, you might have to just put it in the chat, and I'll try to I'll interpret. Thumbs up really is I feel comfortable with the rules as written, or right, I'm comfortable given what you heard in this conversation, that the direction that the rules are going are going to work for you, your interests, or your jurisdiction. That's a thumbs up. You're pretty confident, you're feeling good. Thumbs sideways, feel the rules are headed in the right direction. Good start. And given this conversation, I don't predict undue hardship or significant barriers. That's kind of a thumbs sideways. Let's see what comes out of this discussion. And then a thumbs down really is I have major concerns as written or given the conversation today. That the thumbs down really means I actually think this is going to create some significant barriers, despite what we've already had input on. So good job with the side lead. I don't know how you figured that out. I was like, there's no thumb sideways, but there is a pointy direction. So maybe for folks that visually, thumbs ups, some sideways. Okay, a lot of thumbs sideways. Alexander's leaning towards down, but not quite down. Okay. Any comments on, just to reiterate, I mean, obviously you probably have said why we see a lot of thumb sideways is given this conversation. There's a lot of work that's going to have to happen from what you saw as the draft, kind of first draft of rules to what you'll see before the May 20th meeting. But that was just good, touch point. I didn't see like a bunch of like double downs. So that's a good sign, I think. Jill, jump in.
I just think for my clients, I don't see them using this program. So that's yeah.
Which, in some ways, it's like the rules are not going to get in the way of what they're already doing.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fair, but they're also not kind of maybe incentivized to find the path there. Alexandra and then Eric.
Oh, Jill's, you're
Sorry,
on.
and again, it's because for my clients, their issues are more around infrastructure and right away stuff,
Yeah.
and not so much on the design of the unit.
That's fair. Alexandra and then Eric.
I'm in a similar boat to Jill. I've consistently heard from planners and developers and things like that. I don't really know what the long-term utility of this program is. And I think there are some very real structural barriers in the statute to this actually being a workable program.
That's fair. Eric?
I guess I'm not quite clear on whether or not it'll actually be useful. I hope whether or not it's useful, we get more housing regardless, whether it's this program or a different program. I think in terms of, what's actually on the table now and the thumb sideways, I think it's just thumbs up would be, seeing changes per the conversation today to get to a better outcome.
Yep, that was the intent, is kind of, do you believe in the conversation and where it's going to go? But I appreciate that frame, and maybe I'll just land, Eric, with your first comment is, ultimately we're seeking outcomes, right? And if this program is one of the tools in Oregon's toolbox to build more production, to have more housing, to have more access, then that's a win, even if it won't work for every situation or scenario. So to be continued on that point. So thank you for just indulging in that exercise. We have another meeting on May 20th, maybe 9 to 12. As Ethan and others said earlier, right, written comments are going to be helpful. I think maybe Ethan, one of the questions is, will those comments then get shared as part of a meeting packet so people can kind of come in to the meeting prepared? So maybe if you could talk a little bit about a process between now and May 20th, that'll be helpful, and then we'll close out.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, sorry. Yes, I think in terms of where we go from here, right? We've got the meeting summaries that we typically include in the packet, and the comments that we receive, whether it's red lines or thoughts, different programmatic approaches, those kind of things are also collected as part of the process here. And so we'll do our best. We'll have to it's going to be kind of funky because we're going to have a cutoff of time, but feel free to continue sending your comments. But we're going to have to actually put the packet together. So forgive us if we aren't able to incorporate your comments and thoughts into the May 13th packet. But we can package those up, provide those. If it's okay with folks here, the red lines, if we get a bunch of red lines and comments on the rules, I don't know how best to effectively share those with folks, and maybe we share more of the commentary. I don't know. I'm curious to how useful is Fred's red lines compared to seeing Fred's red lines and seeing Morgan's red lines for the RAC. Is that helpful for folks? I don't know how impactful that's going to be the RAC members, but we're happy to provide those.
Yeah, so maybe just initial thoughts in terms of we don't want to inundate you necessarily with a bunch of documents that are red lines versions, but if we can find a way to ensure that as you come into the next meeting, you have a sense of where folks have offered opinion and contribution, that could be really helpful. So let's go, Morgan, Brock, thoughts?
I'd be interested. I think it's too much to ask given the time frame to have you try to digest that and summarize. But typically what we do when we have a lot of information like that we can't digest, we just appendicize it. So just stack it up and send it out and tell people Don't feel like you have to review all of that.
Yep.
That's fair. Brock?
Same thing. Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right, so we'll inundate you then, assuming that folks submit, a bundle of commentary. But it's great to get it ahead of time. So I know many of you have already started offering some of those, some of you in the process, and certainly, either name May 13th is when the packet, a week out, is striving to be submitted. So that, just consider that as part of your timeline. On behalf of your colleagues around the table.
I would also
Ethan?
like to
Yeah.
add a little bit more structure around what happens after May 20th, right? So we've got some time between May 20th, our next opportunity, or really I'll call it May 13th for the next version of the rules, and then the final version that we are scheduled to include in the Secretary of State bulletin that gets published on July 1st. So we might be asking or calling up folks or convening folks in that intervening time to ask specific questions. We might even attempt to do some sort of like asynchronous review with Rulemaking Advisory Committee members saying, hey, we've got this, I don't know, call it version 2.5 or something like that, like an interim version of rules. Like, we would love to hear your thoughts on these particular sections. So hoping to use those kind of ways of communication that are outside of the whole group getting together. So appreciate your willingness to jump into those and continue the conversation. I know you all have some really good thoughts and also share the goal of trying to make this program work the best it can. So much appreciated for that in advance.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we'll give you 2.5 minutes back in your life. Appreciate the robust conversation. Thanks for always just showing up so enthusiastic to give your wisdom and expertise. Much love to you all. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the nice weather. We'll see you in May. Take care.